Hello, this is Brandon Douglas speaking, and I would like to welcome you to the presentation on the Fach system. So let's go ahead and dive in. A brief history on the system. It was originally developed in the early 20th century in Germany. The reason for it was designed for an increased demands that were met for singers, and the Fach system is actually a list of roles that you find. We'll get into that a little bit more in detail. Part of this list was for roles because there were more increased demands due to orchestration, bigger orchestras, higher tessitura, and also a range expansion from lower to higher voices. So with the increase of roles, this obviously increased demands, which increased the number of inappropriate repertoire for singers. And this was designed actually to create to reduce more harm done for the singers. So in order to do that, they made sure to make lists so that people knew what roles would be comfortable for them. This allowed for opera houses to actually provide contracts to singers to give them more updates on roles that they would be demanding, and that way, if there were any roles that were not in their vocal Fach, then they would actually be able to show the contract, and it would protect them. I had originally started with 4 different types of Fachs, with where you had the 4 main voice parts at the time, which were soprano, contralto, tenor, and bass. Eventually, it developed into the 6 that we know more now today, which is soprano, the mezzo-soprano, contralto, the tenor, the baritone, and the bass. Alright. Understanding the Fach system. First of all, this is very important that we realize this is a categorization of roles, which is a voice category, but it is not necessarily the categorization of a voice type. Sandra Cotton, in her paper, Voice Classification in Fach, demonstrates the nature of voice teachers wanting to actually categorize their students' voice by the vocal Fach, and this is very important to avoid. So make sure that you're avoiding that when you are teaching this. The Fach system is also always evolving, and it's very diverse in its lists. I'll show you a couple lists later about it. This is the audition. So what the Fach system provides is actually materials for auditions and competitions that you can see, and also it develops based on popularity of what the current standard is. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the Fach system. The female Fach is comprised of the soprano, the mezzo-soprano, and the contralto. Common subdivisions that you will see are the lyric, the dramatic, and the coloratura. And there's even more subdivisions, but those are the 3 most common that you'll see in most voice parts. Alright, the upper female voice. So first we start off with the soubrette. Its range goes from C4 all the way up to a C6. It usually provides a light voice and is best for the middle voice. There's no actually extensive coloratura in the soubrette soprano, so keeping a nice warm range with the light voice where you can work on the upper range and also lower range, but that middle voice is going to be really solid. So one of the biggest roles that we see in a soubrette soprano is the role of Susanna in The Marriage of Figaro by Mozart. Let's go ahead and take a look at a clip. Alright, first of all, I apologize for if the audio is funky, but here you will see the aria De Vieni non tardar from The Marriage of Figaro. and that gives you an idea of some of the soubrette, the long flowing lines in the middle voice. Let's go ahead and move on to the lyric coloratura. So lyric coloratura extends the range of the soprano, going from a C4 all the way up to an E6 or an F6 even, which is very high, and you want to keep the voice light and high is often. It's also a small voice, so it doesn't necessarily go over the orchestra in terms of volume, but rather the pitch level. And there's kind of a lack of richness and resonance in the voice, which allows it to go really high. One of the best roles for this is the role of Olympia in Tales of Hoffmann by Jacques Offenbach. And here is the dull song from Tales of Hoffmann. As you can see, it is a very high roll, extending the range really up into the E, F6 area. And that is kind of the coloratura, but keeping it very light and fluttery is a good way of putting it. Alright, let's move on to the lyric soprano. This is a very common type of soprano that you will find. The range, again, is just a C4 to a C6. And it's a very beautiful and strong lyrical voice. It's not really heavy. The soubrette and the lyric actually cross a lot. A lot of soubrette roles are considered lyric soprano roles, depending on the list that you look at. But one of the best roles for this is Musetta from La Bohème by Puccini. And here is Quando men vo. And that is a good demonstration of kind of the lyric going all the way up, but also keeping the beautiful middle lines very light and beautiful, strong, flowing lines along with the middle voice, as well as the upper registers. So lyric soprano is one of the most common types of sopranos that you will find, which is why at the beginning I say lyric as one of the main subdivisions. So it's definitely a role to look out for. Alright, the dramatic coloratura, there's a lot of, it combines some of our subdivisions even into more in depth with some of the intensity. The range you have is C4, and that can even go up to an F6. It's very similar to lyric soprano quality, but it has fast vocal acrobatics and melismas often, and you just having to move notes. It's very high notes. One of the best roles to note is the Queen of the Night from the Magic Flute by Mozart. And here is Diana Damrau performing De Hölle Rache. And that is one of the most famous coloratura parts that you know of. That's for the dramatic coloratura. So another one is the spinto, which is a light dramatic soprano. We get into the heavy one next, but for right now, let's go with the light. And a lot of the range usually deals with the C4 up to, can be a B5, sometimes even a C6. It's a big sound that cuts through the orchestra, but filled with still lighter tones. There are occasional mezzo roles even that these sopranos can do. The biggest role for a light dramatic soprano to achieve is Cho-Cho-San from Madama Butterfly by Puccini. And here is Un bel di vedremo from Madame Butterfly. listen to the lower sounds and it builds even more to the upper registers. Alright, the next dramatic soprano that you have is you also have the actual dramatic soprano. So this is the heavier, darker sound. It's a powerful voice. Lower range goes from, can be a B3 all the way to a C6 sometimes. Really big range. Sings over large orchestras. One of the best roles is Aida. And here's a clip from by Giuseppe Verdi. This is Leontine Pricing, O Patria Mia. As you can tell, it's very powerful and cuts through the orchestra very well. Now, one of the biggest sopranos to cut through the orchestra is the Wagnerian soprano, which goes from a range that can be much like lower a little bit to all the way up to a C6 and has a very dramatic range. It's an intense, dramatic soprano voice. You sing over very large orchestras. We also have the Valkyrie, which is one of the most famous. But one of the hardest roles in opera is Isolde from Tristan und Isolde by Wagner. This segment from Tristan und Isolde, the Liebestod. Listen to the bill of the orchestra and having to sing over it these very hard notes. As you can tell, this voice is very difficult, and the Wagnerian orchestra is ginormous, so you really need a very powerful voice to get these roles, and it takes a lot of stamina for the Wagnerian soprano. Alright, let's take a look at middle to lower female voices. The first one is the lyric mezzo-soprano, going from a range of a G3 that can go all the way up to a B5. And it's a lighter mezzo voice, a lot of pants rolls. You have Cherubino is one of the biggest ones. So the Marriage of Figaro by Mozart. Here is Non so più. I realize that was a very brief clip, but you can tell that it requires very high vocal demands of lyricism and carefulness with the notes. Alright, the next one is the coloratura mezzo-soprano, going also can be from a G3 to a B5, and it's a very flexible mezzo range, agility with higher notes and florid passages, and it's very similar to the lyric mezzo. Most famous is probably Rosina from the Barber of Seville by Rossini, and here is Una voce poco fa. And you can see with the florid motion of all the notes, having to flutter is very important, and going from a very low range to a high range and holding those notes. Alright, that concludes the first part of this presentation, but go ahead and click on the Fach system part 2 in order to continue.